It's been a year since I moved to Bali and I've made so many videos about all sorts of different things, food, accommodation, things to do, little day trips around the place. But I've rarely reflected on what it's actually like to live here. And I just thought I'd take this opportunity after a year of being in Bali to reflect on what life's really like, how much I'm spending, whether I enjoy it, and does it feel like home? I guess the first thing I want to talk about is adaptation to Bali. When you come here as a tourist, it's one thing, but when you live here, you've got to deal with things on a daily basis, such as the bureaucracy, language, because you're dealing with local people more often, in certain circumstances that are not tourist related. So sometimes language becomes an issue as well. Now, I've got a fairly good grasp of Indonesian, so that hasn't really bothered me, and my wife's Indonesian as well. So that doesn't really affect us, but I'm sure that would be a big concern for a lot of people. The other thing is culture, the way things work around here, and how people act in certain situations. This is not Australia, and things are different here. So there's a bit of an adaptation, I guess, to those sorts of things when things don't go the way that you would expect or plan them to. And some people get frustrated with that sort of stuff, and I do too. And I always have to remind myself after being here, well, for a year, but also Java for a bit longer, that the obligation is always on me to adapt to Indonesian life rather than Indonesians adapting to my way of life. And if you take that philosophy, you'll come a lot further and you might find yourself not being quite as grumpy as you might otherwise be. Now, some of you will know that I haven't just moved to Indonesia. I've been in Indonesia for quite a long time. I've only just moved to Bali. So some of those cultural adaptations for me have been a little bit easier. But finding a daily routine is something that you've got to do in any place that's new to you. And one of the things that I've made a point of doing when I've moved here is to get into some sort of regular routine. And for me, that's been focused on running. And the reason I do that is that if you don't get into a routine, you can really find yourself lost, not knowing where to go. So what I tend to do is to run every day, go to a coffee shop every day as well. I go to the same one most of the time, but I'm trying to broaden my horizons a little bit in terms of my routine. And I also have the YouTube channel to keep me anchored as well. And I think if you're considering moving to Bali, it's something that you'll need to think about as well is, what are you actually going to do here? What are you going to do to occupy your time? Are you just going to hang down at the bar all day, or are you going to get involved in some sort of volunteer organisation? Are you going to have any ability to work here? And that's probably going to be a no, because most people don't have the correct visa for that. So what are you going to do? And finding your own routine is really important. Some people get stuck into paddle or tennis or some other sports. That's one of the big things that people do. Other people just get stuck into the bar scene, perhaps some other social events. But that's certainly something you'll need to think about. Let's talk about the social scene. I'm not a very extroverted person. I don't need lots of friends, but I do need friends. I do need to interact with people. And I've been drawn to more of the Indonesian crowd than I have of the foreigner crowd. Of course, I've got foreigner friends, I've got Indonesian friends, but I'm not right into the whole expat scene here. So you'll rarely, well, you would never have seen me at an expat event, for example. I've never been to one. I don't know why, maybe because I haven't really, I don't know, maybe because I've been in Java a while, I've sort of probably split my allegiances a little bit, but that's where we're at the moment. But a lot of other people do find great comfort in socialising with people that have some similar background to them, and that's fine. You'll see there's lots of Sunday roast meetups or social clubs or dining clubs, paddle clubs. There's all sorts of different social events that are going on throughout the week here in Sanur, and most people find it fairly easy to find their own community. But you've got to make an effort, as with everything that you do that's new. You really need to make an effort. It's like going to a new school. You don't just roll up and make friends. You've got to make a bit of an effort. And I find that if you're a really social person, you're going to need to do that here as well. If you just like poking around the house without doing anything day to day, well, that'll be fine. You can just do that too. which is pretty much what I do. And I'll go out and do a bit of paddle every now and then and catch up with friends here and there. One of the things about moving to a new country, and we're in a new country, is the food. You are not living in your home country anymore, and food is vastly different. Quality, price, and types. Now, if you want to have the same diet as you have back in your home country, you can do it, but it's going to cost you a fortune because all of that gear has to be imported. All the different ingredients have to be imported. And it's really difficult, especially when it comes to things like cheese. You can get cheese here, and it can be locally made, but you pay a lot for it. Because I'm married to an Indonesian, I eat a lot of Indonesian food. In fact, I'd say most of my food is more Indonesian focused, which makes my adaptation here quite a lot easier than it otherwise would be. I'm also a little bit of a bit more adventurous in terms of the food that I'm happy to eat. If I was sort of meat and 3 veg and didn't want to adapt to the food here, I'd be in a bit of trouble, I reckon. I probably would survive on chicken schnitzel and chips down to the local warung. But luckily that's not the case. We do eat a mix of Western food. Like I have oats for breakfast, for example. You know what I mean? Like I'm not too Asian inspired, but yeah, I do eat a lot of rice because it's cheap. I eat stir-fried veg. I'll do a lot of online orders through Gojek or Grab to more local type places as well, rather than always eating at a cafe or a bar or something like that. That's the way I've dealt with it. As far as going to the supermarket goes, I try and do a mix of local groceries and supermarket groceries. Supermarket groceries are often a lot more expensive, a lot more imported stuff. And as far as the local, veggies go, we have a supplier that can deliver us, fruit and veg and that sort of stuff, but not everything, and it's not always reliable. As long as I've been living in Indonesia, I've eaten out quite a lot, which is a lot different to how I live when I'm in Australia. If I'm in Australia, I rarely eat out. I'll be eating at home most of the time. Here it's a bit different, mainly because of prices. When you can get, a nasi goreng for 20,000 or a kue tiao goreng or something like that, you're more likely to steer towards that than go and cook something yourself. There's a few little hidden pitfalls in that as well, because obviously if you're eating all that fried food and store-bought food all the time, it's not the best for you. It's nice, but you've got to have a bit of balance there as well. So let's talk about housing. That's probably the major issue for everyone who moves to Bali. Housing is number one because it's your biggest expense, and it's actually quite difficult at the moment to find something that's suitable for most people. Basically because the amount of stock's low, demand is high, prices are going through the roof as a result, and it's just quite a point of friction right now. I'm quite lucky in that I'm living in a place that's incredible, and I feel that the price is quite good. I'm paying 125 million per year. In future years, I hope that it doesn't go up, but I'm happy with the price, I'm happy with the place, and I think most people would be happy with the place as well. I'm living west side of the bypass. If you want to live east side of the bypass in Sanur, you're going to have problems because it's a lot more expensive. Unless you've got the money, of course, and you might get something a little bit smaller. But that's up to you, I guess. There are a number of different ways you can rent a property here. You can't really buy it as a foreigner. I mean, it's almost impossible to do. There are ways, but it's not for everyone. It's through, company ownership and this sort of thing. But for the average foreigner, you can't own land. You'll go on a 30-year lease, or you'll do a year-to-year lease arrangement, which is what I'm doing. I think for most people moving over for the first time, a year-to-year lease is actually the best option. You might get lucky where you fall in love with Bali and have just bought a 30-year lease and you're happy, living happily ever after. That's possible. And I know people who have done it. Hi, Mike D. But that's not going to happen for everyone, because you might commit to a long-term lease and find out you don't really like it here, and then you're stuck with it. You've got to try and get rid of it. I'd highly recommend that you come over, try and get a 1-year rental. You might pay a little bit more for it, And then when you're here, get a feel for the areas that you like, whether you actually like living in Bali, because that's possible that you hate living here, even though you like it as a tourist. Yeah, so that's my recommendation as far as housing goes. Just ease your way into it. Just wanted to say something about the possibility that you may not like living here. For me, living in Bali is like being on holiday every day. And I really do mean it. It feels like holiday every day. Now, it doesn't feel like the normal Bali holiday where, you know, you're just amazed at everything you see. But it's so relaxed that it feels like a holiday. And you've got to be careful sometimes that you don't get too much into the holiday vibe, you know, get too much into the beers or eat too many not dodgy, but like too much, go too gluttonous, if you like, and eat too much of the good stuff. And don't be too hedonistic about your time here. I think you've got to be careful of that when you live here, because, as I said, living here does feel like, for me, a holiday. And I think a lot of people do feel like it's a bit of a holiday as well when they live here. It's such a relaxed lifestyle. Now, you're going to have the financial backing to do it, of course. But how much that is depends on lifestyle, where you want to live, whether you want to keep travelling back to your home country or not, for holidays or to visit family and friends. Which brings me to the point of, do you really have to live here for 12 months of the year, or can you do it part-time? And I really want to sort of highlight this point, because it's not talked about too much, is that a lot of people do come and live here for 3 months on, 3 months off, or 6 months on, 6 months off. And they do that throughout the year because they still have commitments back in their home country. They might have like someone told me they've got a hobby farm or something like that they need to attend to. You might have grandkids or kids or other family members that you need to or would like to visit regularly. You don't want to miss them growing up, or, you know. So it's possible to have that sort of hybrid arrangement. It does cost more, and you're going to have to figure out exactly what your housing arrangements are going to be like in both countries. But people do it. Now, you could choose to rent a place for a year here and just leave it empty for half a year, if you've got the money to do that. That would be my preference, to be honest. Or you could each time you come back, go back and find a new place, but that'd be a bit of a pain. I'd be more inclined to just have 2 houses. Whether that's possible for you or not, you'd have to look at your finances, but certainly something that you should consider and don't discount if you're thinking about moving here. Something a lot of people don't think about when they're coming to Bali is how they're going to get around once they live here. Now, if you're living east side, you can probably walk everywhere or catch taxis. But if you're living west side, where the accommodation's a little bit more value for money, you really need to have a think about how you're going to get around, and are you willing to ride a scooter? Now, if you're not, you can get around in a car. You could own a car and drive that, or you could just get around in taxis all the time. But it's something to consider, because if you live in an area that's got a bit of traffic in it and you're in a car, that could be quite a bit of a problem, I reckon. So definitely something you need to think about, and that will, you know, what you're able to do as far as transport goes will also affect your housing decision as well. Because if you're east side, it's not such a big deal. You can get around with taxis, but west side, you can still get around in taxis, but it's, for me, I own a motorbike and I use that every day to get down to the beach, for example, to keep my routine going. And without that, I think that would be quite difficult. In fact, for me, it would make the place unlivable. I wouldn't like it. Now, I'm not everyone, so you'd have to take that into consideration for your own little set of circumstances. There is, of course, also the bus, but the bus is quite limited. It doesn't go to too many places. It goes to Kuta, it goes to Ubud, goes to, well, you can get into Denpasar as well. The thing about it is, though, if you don't have your own wheels, you will be walking a lot. Now, if you're happy to walk a lot, that's probably perfect as well. So, I mean, yeah, walking around, depends how far you want to walk and whether you can stand the heat or not. But yeah, that's certainly something to think about. The walking aspect is something you could do as well. Something that people don't really talk about too much is the impact this place has on your health and well-being. whether it be positive or negative. You can have some negative impacts by living here. The average age of death of a person in Indonesia is far lower than it is in any Western country, far lower. Through a variety of reasons. Smoking rates are much higher, access to quality healthcare is not too great. For richer Indonesians, I'm sure their life expectancy is much higher. And getting back to the point of, you know, abusing your body while you're here, you can do that too. But there's also positives that people don't really talk about too much, and that is when you live here, you are more likely to be much more relaxed, and that sort of removal of stress from your life, I'm sure, has a massive impact on your well-being, both mental and physical. I certainly don't feel as well. It's not about stress, but I know that if I'm stuck in traffic, I'm tense throughout the whole day. That tension is there throughout the whole day. Because I'm not stuck in traffic in Bali, I don't feel tense. And that's where I came from. I came from Java, where I was stuck in traffic all day, just going for a run. And that really caused tension throughout the rest of my day. It doesn't happen here. If you're in a normal life at the moment where you're working 9 to 5, or you've got some other stressful arrangement at work, coming here is going to remove all of that, or almost all of it, especially if you don't have to manage those work phone calls and things after hours that you might have to do at the moment. Why did I choose Sanur over other places? Well, I think Sanur is a good place to live. Other places in Bali can be fantastic to visit. I know if I go to Canggu and visit a cafe there, I think some of the food there is some of the best in the world. If you go to Ubud and you see the rice fields and that sort of thing, it's heaven. But for living, I've tried out a few different places in Bali, or explored them, and I think for me, Sanur ticks all the boxes. I think as far as traffic goes, it's still bearable. There aren't any traffic jams where I live and the places that I go. If I have to go to Denpasar, I'll hit traffic, but it's not that big a deal. And the people here are generally a lot older than the rest of Bali, and that also gives you a more relaxed vibe. A lot of this stuff is not new to the people who are in Sanur. The expats that live here have seen it all before. So it's just all pretty normal here, pretty suburban. And living in a place that's a little bit, shall we say, boring is actually fantastic. Just get on with your own life and enjoy. I love it. Let's talk about future plans. Well, my future plans are to stay in Sanur and to find something a little bit more long-term, much like I'd suggest most people do when they come here for a 1 or 2 year rental and then look for something more long-term if they love it here. And I do love it here. So I'm looking for land at the moment. Susan will buy it because she's Indonesian. She can buy freehold land. I'm open to other things as well, like buying an already built building. I'm even open to leasehold, 30-year lease. It's not my preference because I think it's better to own freehold, but and I have the opportunity to do that. But yeah, so I do want to stay here long term. Do I see myself dying here? Well, I hope not, but I certainly could live here a long time. Would I see my older self? What's your name?
My name is Taeyong,
How you going, Dion? Where are you from?
South Korea.
How do you say it again?
South Korea.
Your name? How do you say it?
Taeyong.
Taeyong. This is Taeyong from South Korea. He's loving Sanur. Oh, that was nice. Those Korean guys. Got a new subscriber. Funny guys. Sometimes it happens when you're filming out in the public. I mean, people do stare. It's pretty normal because I look like a bit of an idiot, to be honest, filming like this. But yeah, very, very cool. Look at that. Beautiful out here in Sanur. And I think the real question that a lot of people have going on in their mind is, what happens when I'm 80 and I'm not so well and medical costs are starting to rise and I need help in my life? What's going to happen? And I have thought about it. I absolutely have thought about it. The problem is, if you think about it too much, is that there's actually no solution to it. The problem is that the only solution really is to live here until a certain age where you're still healthy, move back to your home country, for example, Australia, and live out your days there. But if you think about it too much, it starts to get quite complicated, because then you've got to decide, when do I move back? Am I entitled to universal healthcare, for example, in Australia, Medicare? Am I entitled to it when I move back? How do I do that in terms of finances? Do I have a house already back there? If you start thinking about it too much, it will hamper your decision to move here. And for me, the way I've handled that is to not think about it too much. I have given it thought, absolutely have given it thought, but I haven't gotten too carried away with the minutiae of it, because if you do that, you'll never move. You'll never do it. So let yourself have a little bit of a think about it, but don't get too caught up in it, is what I would say. Now, if you're a little bit older than I am, maybe you're already 70, I think these things are a lot more of a reality for you. And in that case, you'd have to really think about, am I happy to have my healthcare needs taken care of in Bali? If you are, no problem, move here. If you're not, then you've got to decide, what am I going to do if I get really sick? What am I going to do? Do I just ditch all my Bali plans and just go back home? You know, that's a tough choice. The other thing is, if you have a heart attack or a stroke, your chances of survival here are less than they would be in a Western country. I know that from first-hand experience with people I know. So just take that into consideration. Some people don't care. Some people really sort of are health conscious and are worried about their health. Yeah, have a think about it. A lot of people want to know how much it costs to live here, really. Because when you come here as a tourist, of course you're spending $100 a night on accommodation, you're on the beers, you're eating all the best food, catching cabs everywhere. What's it like when you live here? And the truth of it is that your biggest expense is going to be accommodation. So for me, I've spent in 1 year, I've spent $12,500 on accommodation. Well, that's not a lot of money, or 125 million. As far as other expenses go, without thinking about some of the other expenses that I have that other people won't. So for example, I wouldn't include the cost of airfares for me to go on holiday elsewhere. If you were just staying here, your other costs are actually quite low. I bought a motorbike which costs 36 million. Now that probably will last 10 years. Petrol it's so low that it's almost not worrying about. I'll spend about 100,000 on fuel, maybe once every couple of weeks, 3 weeks. Food is your next biggest expense, of course, and your budget really does depend on what sort of food you like to eat. As I said, for me, I'm eating oats every morning. Oats are dirt cheap. The oats I'm eating, I actually have like a few sacks of them. And for me, I'm happy to have oats with a few frozen berries on top every morning, with a bit of milk as well. And then for dinner, well, lunch and dinner, like lunch, we'll have might get a sandwich delivered on the apps. So that'll be between us, that'll probably cost 100,000 per day. And then for dinner, our budget for dinner would be somewhere around around 60 to 70,000 for a cooked meal every night, and then there's snacks as well. So when you add up all of those expenses, and I have coffees not every morning, but most mornings. So when you look at those expenses, I'm spending about 250,000 per day on food. Now, if you do 250,000 times by 365 days in the year, you'll get that price, whatever that is. Again, not a lot of money. Not a lot of money when you consider the sort of lifestyle you're having. There are also other miscellaneous expenses. There's healthcare costs. You know, if you need to go to the dentist, which I've been to a couple of times, you know, it's going to cost you at least $1 million a go. I don't drink a ton of alcohol, so my bill on alcohol is quite low. If you drink a fair bit of alcohol, like if you drink beers, it doesn't have to be expensive either, because you can get your beers, if you're buying away from the cafes, a beer costs less than 20,000 per beer. So, you know, you could probably even get on the beers and still be not spending too much. Now, with those expenses that I've sort of talked about there, you could really add in a bunch of fat into all of that and come up with a rough figure for my type of lifestyle of, say, 300 million in a year for all expenses, rent, food, the lot. Some people will do it more cheaply for sure, because you can do it heaps cheaper than that, like really. And some people will spend a heap more. And it really depends on your lifestyle. It also depends on, like for example, visas. I do all my own visas myself, so I only have to pay the fees to the actual government. I don't pay any agent to do all of that sort of stuff. If you're paying agents, those costs can be significantly higher. Maybe factor in 20 million a year per person for visas. So all in all, pretty cheap to live in Bali. Not as cheap as it used to be, and not as cheap as some people think it might be, but certainly so much cheaper than most countries in the world, or most developed countries in the world. So let's talk about highlights of the year. Well, highlights of the year for me really have been two things. The house, just being in that house, I've really felt grounded by that. It's been a fantastic place to live, and it feels like home. It's something which I didn't expect to feel so quickly, but it feels like home. The other highlight of the year for me has been this YouTube channel. It's been a real eye-opener for me, and has actually allowed me into the lives of a lot of other people who I've met on the paths around Sanur. And I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed meeting people. It's kept me grounded as well by giving me something to do most days. Sometimes you think, oh God, I can't be bothered making a video today. Then other times you're just going for it and just eating all the food and reviewing all the things. It's been fantastic. So 1 year in Bali, does it feel like home? Of course it does. It feels like home. You know what it's going to feel like when you live here. You know it. Unless it all goes pear-shaped, of course, which you can do. But for most people, it's going to feel beautiful. It's going to feel like home. And it does for me. Look, thanks for sticking with me here on this 1 year recap in Bali and what it's like to live here after a year on the ground, all the ups and downs and the things that have kept me grounded. And thanks for sticking by this channel. Really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all things Sanur. I'll catch you next time.